I've sanded the trunks. I think they look really good. And I went along each edge with my scribe and just made some nail holes in there, and I've done that on each side. So I'm going to have one of these actually in the shop, sitting at the front, just there. So I want to make some little fabric baskets to sit on there and have some more shells. And then the other two I want to create a little display on to go in the entrance hall of the shop at the back under those stairs, or sort of partially hidden by the stairs. I'm actually going to glue these two together and then use the fishing net, drape that over them and put some shells on and some other bits. So let's do that now. So you might remember I bought this buff puff sponge to use as fishing net material, but I actually think this is going to be more to scale, and I think some chocolate coins came in this, and it was sort of bound at the bottom with a little sort of wire band, so I've cut that off. It is in sort of like a cylinder, so I'm just going to cut it so that it's just in a strip, and then I'm going to drape that over the crates. Let me just cut it straight down one side like that. And I'm just going to sort of drape it so that I can stick that bit down at the back and then sort of come across the crates like that. Have that bit tucked around there. That might look quite nice. So I'm going to try and just use my normal wood glue to stick it to the crates. If I actually apply a bit to the back there where I want to join it in, I'll also gather that in as well. In fact, as that's at the back, what I might do as well is just put a little bit of tape on there just to hold that bit into place, which I think I'm going to need to do because I don't think that's going to work. So let me get a bit of masking tape. I'm just going to use a bit of this cream one. Let's stick that right across the back there so that it won't be showing obviously from the front. I'll just pop a little bit more on that end. Snip that corner off. Don't want any of this showing from the front. Let me stick that down at the side there. And just sort of drape that round. And what I'm hoping I'll be able to do is actually glue it down behind the embellishment. So I'm going to paint some of these. If you imagine I apply sort of glue to that starfish there, and then the glue should hopefully make contact with the glue of the wood. And maybe have one there as well. And then I want to put a lot of shells on it as well. So I'm going to get some of these embellishments painted up, and then we'll try sticking it all down. If not, that side will be hidden, so we could put a little bit more tape around there. And maybe a little bit on that side. I'd rather not do that, just in case people can sort of peer in and see it. So we'll try with the embellishments first, and then we'll go from there. So I was just painting up some embellishments and had a thought about using double-sided tape. So I did a little test piece on this side, which isn't going to be seen as clearly from the front, and it does actually work, so I'm quite pleased with that. So I'm just going to dot another couple of bits about, one in there so I've got that little shelf that I can put things on, and then maybe one round this other side as well. So that's a really good way of doing it. Just take a little bit, move that up a bit, get that in there. Get rid of the back in there. I think I'll put a little bit just down at the bottom as well, just so it's not sticking up down there. And then we'll have a bit at the side. bit in there, and then I'll secure that last little corner around there. Quite like that. And I was going to have this hanging on the wall, but again I thought we'd have problems actually getting it on the wall, and I'd also be working on it inside that sort of tight landing area, so it would have been difficult to get to. Just wondering whether to put a little bit in there as well, just to hold that down. I think I will, because I don't want, you know, the things aren't going to stick to it if it's sticking forwards like that. So just sort of play around with it and see where it naturally wants to sort of sit. Just put that in there. Yeah, I think that looks quite good. Now I'm going to find out some shells and some bits and pieces to actually display on there. So I've sorted out here a bag of smaller shells that I want to use in those little fabric baskets that I spoke about earlier on the other trunk at the front of the shop. So I'll keep those to one side. And then I've got these lovely sort of blue ones which I haven't used anywhere else before, so I thought I'll have one there, maybe one down at the bottom there as well. Thought that might look quite nice. And I think I'm going to have to use tacky wax for these. Come back a bit there. So I've got actually using my screwdriver now rather than a cocktail stick, because I find that you can get it out better with that. So let's just put a little bit on the flat area, see if that will work. If not, we can use some tape and things. Some double-sided tape again. Like that. I don't want to press too hard because I want to break them. They're lovely, those ones with the blue stripes in. I think that's working. That seems to be on there quite solid. And if you didn't want to sort of do a display like this, but you like the idea of the trunk, you could just make a little bit more of your trunk. So you could actually maybe put some rope handles in, so just drill a couple of holes at the sides. You could obviously use a trunk lock on there as well, or as I said earlier, you could have one open and do a display in there. That looks quite good. There's just a little bit of tacky wax show in there. I tried just to sort of put a little bit onto that edge. Didn't quite work, so we'll get rid of that. Okay, let's see what else we've got in here. Okay, so there are my trunks, and I've used a mixture of double-sided tape and tacky wax to glue all of those pieces into place. So it's just really a matter of trial and error, and I had to put a little bit more tacky wax on the net at the side, which kept sort of peeling up. So just sort of persevere with it and stick it down all sort of best that you can. And then you may recognise the little lantern there. I made a set of 3 of these for my own doll's house. I was going to use them in the study, so I will make another set for my doll's house, but I just quickly added some dark blue paint to them so that I could use them in this display, as I needed something else and I thought they would just be perfect. But I haven't had time today to actually make them afresh, so I've just pinched them out of my doll's house. And then the other 2 I actually put up there in the fireplace, so painted them all dark blue. I think they look quite good in there. And then the sort of dried twigs that were up there I've put downstairs. I've just put those in there for safekeeping. I'll move those out. And then I had 3 of those clocks left, so I've just stuck those into place up there. So my baskets will go there, which will just be sort of on the right hand side of the door as you go into the shop. So I've still got to make those little baskets to go on there with some more shells in. And I've displayed the trunks out there at the back of the little entrance hall. I think they look really good there. And you might have noticed that I've got rid of the little basket of beach balls, and I just didn't quite like it there in the end. And sometimes that does happen, you make something and then you're not quite sure of it when you actually put it into place. So I've taken that out for now. I may put that back in when I'm displaying it or something, but I think just having that over there in the corner looks really nice. So let's have a go at those little baskets now. So I've just used my compass to draw circles onto 3mm 1/8 of an inch thick balsa wood, and I'm going to use these for the base of the baskets. We're going to cut these out, and because it's from balsa wood they are really easy to cut out, so you can just actually go in with your knife and just sort of go round like that and then sort of come off at an angle. That bit just broke off as I was even moving it. But just be really careful again of your fingers. And then just go back around until you've cut through, cut the pieces free like that. It doesn't matter if it's not exact, because we're just going to use this to wrap some thin card around, which we're going to cover in fabric to make the baskets. So once you've cut your discs out, just go around the outside with a piece of sandpaper just to smooth them off. But like I say, they don't have to be perfectly round. So for the card, I'm just using a piece of card out of a box of, I think, Mr. Kipling cakes or something like that, or mini rolls or something, and it's just nice thin card. So cut a piece that measures 90mm by 12mm, and that's 3.5 inches by 1/2 inch, and then just sort of curl it between your fingers like that, and that just helps it to stick around the circle a bit easier. And I can't remember if I said earlier, but the disc should be 22mm in diameter, or 7/8 of an inch. But obviously you can make them any size you like. This is just a really nice technique for making a little sort of round basket. I'm going to have 3 on top of that trunk, but you might just want 1 and some other bits, or a couple of larger ones. And then apply glue along the long edge and then along that edge as well. And then just stick the disc in the centre like that and curl your card around. Give it a good press. Bring up the other side and glue that down as well. Try and get the card nice and snugly around the disc. If the disc isn't sort of perfectly round, you will have a bit of gap in, but don't worry about that. Just sort of press it all in like that, and then just leave that to dry for a moment. And I just like to stick a mini clamp on the join at the back there. That way it's less likely to spring open. Pop that one there as well. Just leave those to dry for a few moments. Okay, so we're now ready to cover the baskets, and this is what they will look like. They're quite pretty. So cut a piece of canvas measuring 90mm by 12mm, which is 3.5 inches by 1/2 inch, and we're going to begin by applying the glue around the bottom. And this is just the same as we made our shopping basket, same technique, but just with a different base, I suppose. Different starting point. Get the glue all the way around there. And where the join is in the card, we're going to treat that as the back again. So bring your canvas to the front like that, so it's sort of sitting centrally. Press it down and then work it around, keeping it as straight as you can. Give it a good press down. Slide it up if you've sort of pulled it down a little bit. Don't worry about the glue because that will sort of dry into the canvas. Apply a bit more glue to the little flap at the back. And glue that down. And bring in your scissors, and we're going to cut some slits, probably about, I don't know, 9mm apart, or 3/8 of an inch. You don't have to measure that, just do that by eye. And then off each of those just snip the corners. And I just found that this helps it to lay against the bottom a lot easier, otherwise you sort of tend to have lots of little points sticking out at the front of the basket. Get those little bits out. And then apply glue to the back of each of those. Looks rather like a crown. Quite apt as it's the Jubilee today. And then glue those down, sort of pressing them nice and firmly to the bottom, pulling them in as you press so that you haven't got any of those little lumps around the bottom edge. There. Go around like that, sort of tightening them in, see if you've got those little bumps there. Just press them underneath. Stay with my fingers. Like that. And then I've got here my patterned piece of fabric, and this is 90mm again by 22mm. So that's 3.5 inches by 7/8 of an inch. And I folded over a 3mm hem, and this time we're going to apply the glue inside the basket and then around that outside top edge. And because we're going to be doing displays in these, there's no need to line them, and I'm going to stick mine to the top of the crate, so I'm not going to sort of put a circle on the bottom either to cover up that gap, but obviously if you want to do that then you can, or if you're using them for something else. Again, have a look where your back join is and then start this at the front. I forgot to put it around the outside, look. It's because I'm rushing now. And then again, sort of just overlap very, very slightly. Overlap the canvas so that you're hiding the raw edge. Feed it all around. A bit more glue on the flap there. I think I've just got enough left. Tuck that inside. And then glue that together. And then put it down on your surface and just fold it all in. In like that, and then work your way around, and again with your fingernail sort of press it against the side so that you're getting those nice sort of tight, neat top edges. Make sure you're not pulling it up away from your canvas too much. Go around and pinch it all in, and there are our 3 baskets, and I'm now going to fill those with shells. So after making the 3 baskets, I can really only fit 2 comfortably on top of the trunk there. 3 looks a little bit crushed up. So I think I am just going to have the 2. That will come in handy for something else. And I'm actually going to glue these into place, and again so that the nicest edge of the basket is facing towards the front of the shop, or the opening of the shop. Press that into place. So I want to move out into the entrance hall now, and I want to make like a little electrical box and some light sockets. So I've got here some little light switches which I've painted white and then done a black border around the bottom part. That's like the old-fashioned light switches, as I imagine our shop to be a really sort of old-fashioned shop. The building anyway. So I've got a piece of 1.5mm abishi here, 1/16 of an inch, that measures 20mm by 10mm, so 3/4 of an inch by just over 3/8 of an inch, and I've beveled each edge. So I'm going to paint that up in a moment and attach the light switches. But with this I want to make like an old-fashioned electrical cupboard to go at the top of the wall, and then have a piece of wire coming down from it. So I've just, again, using 2.5mm Abishi, 3/32 of an inch, cut a piece that measures 27mm, which is 1 inch and 1/16 by 19mm, so 3/4 of an inch. And again, I'm just sort of guessing at this size. I just sort of held the piece up in the room and that looks about right. But what I want to start by doing is just rounding over each edge. So I'm just going to do that in my hand because I just want a really sort of gently rounded edge along each edge. So just sweep the sandpaper along at a 45-degree angle until you get rid of that sharp edge. So I've attached both of those to a piece of masking tape. I'm going to do the electrical box in a grey colour, and I'll do the little light switch in white, and I'm going to use emulsion for that. Okay, so once my paint had dried, I've glued the light switches into place. And then in the electric box, I've just drilled a little hole big enough for a pin, and I'm going to put a pin in there so that the pin head looks like the little lock of the box, because these electrical things are sort of meant to be little electrical cupboards that you'd open up and you've got all your electrical things in there, your trip switch and everything. So I'm just going to cut this down a bit so I can just use the pin head. We cut it just to a few millimetres. Like that, and I'll just pop a little bit of glue over the hole, pop that in. And this is, of course, is optional, but I just sort of always had the idea that it's a really old building and that it would have old electricals in it. Plus the fact that it's very difficult to know what else really to do out in the hallway. I'm going to put a lot of pictures up to sort of fill it up and add some colour. I can't get hold of that. But obviously you wouldn't really have things for sale out there. And there's not really a lot of room to put a lot of things, because obviously they'd just be in the way of the corridors and the stairs and the landing. So I've also stuck a little electrical hazard triangle in the corner there, and I've put that on the printout sheet as well. And then what I've done on the back, and I originally did it on the wrong side because I want the electrical box at the top and then a wire coming down from it to the light switches. So I've just gouged out a little hole that the end of my wire can sit in, so that it actually looks as though it's attached into the cupboard and not just sort of sitting underneath it. I just used the tip of my craft knife to do that, and you just want to cut that out obviously on the back of the wood, and so that it doesn't show from the front. And then I've done that same thing on the light switches, so the wire will run up from those and into the box. So let's fix these into place now. So I've put the box up there, probably about 30mm, 1 1/4 inch from the ceiling there, so quite high up. And then I've just cut a piece of wire, which I'm now going to glue actually to the wall. And this is just cut from actually some of the wiring I had left over from the shop, which I'd trimmed off. So it's good to keep those pieces of wire. I just keep those in a drawer of my cabinet. They're quite handy for things like this. I'm going to start by sticking that into the little hole, and then bring it straight down there. In fact, I think I'm going to trim a little bit off, because that might be a bit too low down for the actual switches. So I've just trimmed that wire off a bit. I think I've removed some of the glue at the bottom with my finger, so that's not sticking very well. And I've made a bit of a mess around the outside of the wire, but I'll just touch that in again with some paint. And now I just want to stick the light switches into place. Hopefully trap down the bottom of that wire. there. I think they look straight. So that's that in place. Like I say, that is optional. You might not want to add that in there. But do have a think about some light switches, as there would be light switches coming in from a sort of main door, even though the main door isn't used. And if you don't actually have these little brass ones, how I've done it before is use a round wooden bead with a hole in the middle. And then you can just use a tiny bit of bristle from a brush or something like that to put in as the little switch in there. And I've made them like that before. And then what I've also got here is this more upstairs sign, and again I've put that on the printout list, so I'm going to glue that into place now as well. And I think I want that sort of level, or sort of close to the light switch there. Just let me check it's level before I actually stick it down. I think that looks about right, so I'll stick that down like that. So what I want to do now to actually finish off the entrance hall and landing is to add some pictures. And I've got some of our cutouts left, which I've got here. So I've got some that I'd backed onto board, and then I've just cut a few more out of some of the sheets that I had left. So I'll back a couple of those onto board as well. I'm not sure if I like those ones, so I don't think I'll use those ones, but I will use some of these. And then actually Matt came up with the suggestion that I might like to print off some of the paintings that he done, actually print them up onto paper, and I could back those as well and hang those up, and I quite like that idea. So if it turns out that I use some of the paintings that you've actually bought, then don't worry, because they won't ever be sold as prints. So if you have one of the originals, then that will remain an original. So what I'll be using in here is just prints. But I just think they're so nice and worth sort of having in the shop forever. So I probably won't be able to film that because there's nowhere really to prop the camera and get into these smaller rooms. So I'll get those put into place and then I'll show you how they look. So I've chosen some pictures that I want to print off. And these are all ones that Matt has painted. You might recognise some of those, especially if you've bought one. And then I've cut just some pieces of balsa wood that I'm now painting around the edges, and then once that's dry I can obviously stick the pictures to the wood and they're ready to hang on the walls. And the reason I'm backing these onto wood is just because I've printed them off onto normal printer paper, and I don't like just sticking paper onto walls. I prefer to back them onto just a thin piece of wood. This is just 1.5, 1/16 of an inch. And then it just gives it a bit of a heavier look. So what I've actually then done here is put the doll's house onto my desk, and I now want to sort of build in these wires at the back. Now unfortunately when I've come to look, I haven't got enough of the brick paper left, so all I've actually got left, just close my drawer, are these strips. So these strips, if I sort of put them across the back, will sort of actually cover all the way up. So it will be a bit of sort of mishmashing about, and it won't then obviously match in with the sides that have faded. I'm not too worried about that because this is obviously the back of the house and won't ever be on display. But I really just want to get this central piece covered, and I'm going to build in two sort of raised panels to hide the wires, but so that if you ever did need to pull the wires out, they will still come out. If you were just to paper over them, which you could do, but you'd see the wires through the paper, and then if you ever had to replace the wires or anything, you would need to then remove the paper. So it just makes it a bit of a long job. So what we're going to do is just build some raised panels so that the wires are still free within inside them. Okay, so basically what I'm going to do is use 5x5 strips to create the edges, and I'm going to glue those into place at either side of each set of wires. So if you imagine that's one set and the second set over there, just because I don't want to do one big panel all the way across. So I'll glue the 5x5 strips into place like that, and then I've got some just some old sheets of wood actually, and I've picked some that's got burn marks in it from the laser cutters. That was one where I had a bit of a test for my carving, so I'll sort of glue that face in. So just some older pieces of wood. Don't use your best wood for this. And then I've also got here my set square to help me get the strips level. So I'll sort of put that down there and line the first strip against it. Glue that into place so it's not right down to the bottom of the table but level with the bottom of the shop. And then I'll just use that as the guide to glue one above it, because obviously it's not as tall as the shop. And then we're just going to stick the sheet onto the panels like that. So really sort of easy structure, but like I say, keeps those wires free within there. So let me get some glue and I'll begin by sticking the strips into place. Okay, so that's my first strip there, going into place. And what I've actually just realised is that the top of this first lot of wires is actually wider than 100mm, which is the thickness of my panel. So with the strips as well, the panel isn't going, the piece of wood isn't going to be quite wide enough. So what I'm going to do is use 2 pieces of wood, or double thickness if you like. So I'm also going to put a strip down the centre, and then I can do 2 thinner strips of sheet wood. Just pressing that first strip into place there. You can use a little bit of masking tape on that if that's not sticking. I'm just going to sort of press and hold for a moment. And then make a pencil mark now for the second piece that I want to be level with the top of the shop. Just make a pencil mark across there, cut that piece. So there's that piece in place as well. And when you're doing that, obviously you want to get it as close to your wires as you can, but don't sort of trap the wires underneath the strip. Like that. I'm going to put another 2 pieces probably in the centre there. And then another one obviously at that side. So I'll still keep them as narrow as I can. And then that one works out really nicely because that is narrower than the 100mm, the 4 inches of the width of the sheet, so that one will be a bit easier. Okay, so let's do the second one now. So I've stuck the strips into place now, and as I was doing this first section I noticed that up here the wire was over to the right of the drilled hole, so if I push it over to the left I can get my strip a bit further in, and I think I can just about get a 100mm panel on there. So there's a little bit of overlap of the strips, but I can still sort of feed the brick paper around that little lip, so that will be okay. And I'd rather do it in one panel because it obviously makes it a lot easier. So I'm quite pleased about that. So what I'm going to do now is apply glue to the strips and then stick my panels into place. So first panel in place there, and as you can see I've put some strips of masking tape across just to hold that into place. I'll now do this one and then I'll measure and cut for the top there. Okay, so the panels are in place. I'm going to leave those to dry off for a bit now, and then I can come back and fit the brick paper. Okay, so there's the first strip of brick paper in place, and you can just see what a huge difference that is to the part that's faded away in the sun there. Now I've sort of roughly matched up the brick, so the sort of lines of grout are running in a line there. And what I actually might do is colour up this brick at the back using maybe some acrylics and maybe just sort of sponge it on just to make it look a little bit redder. But because it is at the back, I'm obviously not as worried, you know, as if that was at the side or the front, because this isn't really going to be seen or whatever on display. But it's just nice really to finish it off. So I applied the glue directly to the brick paper, and I'm using my Gorilla Wood glue again for that. And then I've used Matt's graphics sponge or vinyl sponge to press that along the edges of my panels and then actually press it into place. But you can just use tissue paper for that and just sort of get in there with your fingertips and really push it against the edges of the panels, otherwise you'll end up with sort of bubbling and raised pieces. So quite happy with that. I've got another 3 strips and I've sort of going to have a little thin panel at the top there, but I'll sort of patchwork it all together and then come back and show you how that looks. So let's get the second strip on now. Okay, so that's the panels all covered now, and it's such a shame that the sides have all faded, otherwise that would have looked really nice, but like I say, it's at the back and not too much of a worry. But I will come back and just try and do something to blend it in a little bit. I had to go with a bit of coloured pencil just on that one brick there, and that sort of looks okay, but that would be quite a long-winded process, so I'll probably just try and do it, like I say, with some acrylics or something, and just sort of dot it on with a bit of sponge. But I'm now going to turn the shop back around, and my paintings have all now dried onto the wood, so I can now hang these up in the entrance hall and landing. So the pictures are all now glued into place, and I really like how they look. And just a couple of little tips. The first thing, when you're hanging a lot of pictures like this, you can always use a little bit of tacky wax and just try them into place, sort of try them where you want them. I just sort of started with mine by going sort of up the stairway and then really built from there. So imagining if somebody was actually walking up the stairs, how they would see them as they then walked around and up. And then I think when you're sort of putting pictures along 3 walls like that, or even just along a straight wall, it's always a nice idea just to keep those top lines lining up. That always looks a little bit more pleasing to the eye. And then where I've sort of followed the stair line, because I couldn't keep the tops of the pictures straight, I've lined up the shoreline. So if you're sort of hanging a set of pictures, line up something in the pictures like that if you're staggering them. And that looks quite nice as well. And I sort of started off with 7 prints, but it really just didn't fill up the space enough, so I printed off another 7. But I really like that, and that adds some really nice colour. And I just sort of wanted it to look like a local artist's art gallery type thing. Okay, so now I want to go back to the shop counter and just finish filling out the area underneath. And I want to begin by making a feather duster. To make the feather duster, I cut the pointed end from a cocktail stick. It helps if you roll the cocktail stick along your work surface beneath the blade of your knife. I then used sandpaper to round over the end. Just twist the cocktail stick around in your fingers and sweep the sandpaper over the top. I then used white to paint the cocktail stick. This will be the handle, so you can leave it as natural wood if you like. Cut some strands from your own duster, and you want them to be over 25mm long or over an inch long, and then we'll trim them to size. Or you might want to use miniature feathers if you have them. These are just like nylon strands, and I've got a 3-colour sort of long extendable duster in the airing cupboard, and I'm just using the blue. And then cut your handle to 38mm long, and that's 1.5 inches. And then you want to apply glue to the bottom part of the handle so that you're leaving about 1 inch of handle. But again, you don't need to measure. and then glue the strands around the handle. And don't worry if it looks a little bit messy at this stage. Press them in and hold them until the glue begins to take. Once you've let the glue dry off for a bit, hold on to the sort of strands and then just tidy up around that top. So just trim them into a nice straight line. Just work your way around the handle. I've got here some washi tape or washi tape, and I've cut a strip that's about 2 inches long by 6mm wide, and we're going to wrap it around the top of the strips. So get them straight because they're not all going to be stuck to the handle yet, so straighten them up as much as you can. And you will lose some along the way, that's why it's good to cut off a really nice sized bunch. And then we're just going to glue that around the top so it's touching half of the strands and part of the cocktail stick. Pull it nice and tightly and work it all the way around. Press it around like that. And then let your loose bristles fall away, so you might want to give it a bit of a tap. Pull out any loose ones, but don't be too rough with it, or some of the ones that you've taped will come out as well. And then you just want to trim it to a nicer size, so probably half of what I've got there. Just go straight across. Like giving it a haircut, and then trim it up like that. And over on YouTube for my understairs cupboard I did a 3-colour one, so if you wanted to do a longer one then you would just start at the bottom, so you'd do this the same, and then you'd put the yellow ones around so that they're overlapping, and then use the tape again and then glue your next colour again so they're overlapping. But I think just to fit underneath the counter, just a single colour one will probably work better. Okay, so let's put this into place. And I've just laid that in there, so it's coming forward onto this little box. And then I've also added a few more boxes in there, so just a couple of boxes of shells and some assorted candles as well, and they're just sort of little boxes of stock. Lift that up so you can see a little bit better in there. And I've put those labels onto this episode's printout sheet as well, so you just want to make a little cardboard box to fit that size, so I just did the boxes just slightly bigger than the labels around all sides. So let's put the counter back into place, and I'm sort of storing the little lights in here as well, but I'll move those once I've got the front back on. Okay, so the other thing I've done as well is just make 3 more baskets there to go underneath those corner shelves, and I filled those with shells, and I haven't actually glued those or tacky waxed them into place yet, so that's a little job I'll have to do once this episode is finished. But really like how they look, so let's put that back into place. And then feels really weird saying this, but the final job is to reattach the door. So let me go and find the hinges, and I put those safely in this little drawer in my unit. So I've got 2 of these 3-hole hinges or 6-hole hinges, and I'm going to attach them to the door first and then attach the door to the shop. And on the shop where I've papered, that's actually in the way, so I'm going to sort of tuck that in rather than cutting it away, and that will make the hinge a little bit tighter and will still sort of give a neat edge inside and outside the shop. Okay, so I've got Matt helping me hold the door into place and what I've done is just prop it up on a couple of pieces of 10mm strip wood here, and that will then take the weight of the door. So get your hinges lined up, and then you can screw those into place. And if you've got somebody to help hold the door, then that is a great help. So I haven't got my tripod here, so I'll screw these into place and then we'll come back and make sure that the door is closing correctly. So I got the central screws in at the top and the bottom, and once you've got those first couple of screws in, it supports the weight of the door so that doesn't move around and it's a lot easier. So there we have the final screw going in there. Let me move those out of the way and see if that closes. It's a little bit tight at the top at this end, and there's a little bit of gap in there, so is it because I need to tighten up one of the hinges? That should just sort of sit up there. So I think what I'll do is just do a little bit of tightening of those bottom screws and see if that will just lift it. So let's try that. So I'm just doing a little bit of troubleshooting here with the door. I think this was a problem at the beginning as well, because the door hinges hadn't been fitted in the right place. So this was dropping on one side. So it needed lifting by about 5mm on the right hand side. So as you can see, I've just glued a piece of 5x5 strip into place underneath the step there, and I'll actually paint that up as well, put a bit of black paint on there, and then once the glue has dried I can close that and show you that the door is level. But if you do anything like that, then you just need to remember that you need to lift your door as you close it. Now I'll just knock that off there. I think that's dry now anyway, so I can show you. But if you've built this from scratch, then probably you would have made your door correctly, so you wouldn't need to worry about anything like this. But if you are sort of renovating an older doll's house or shop, then this is a little troubleshooting thing you can do. So I just need to lift that like that, and then that makes a nice level solid door. So before you could see a really sort of large gap along the top on this side, so the door had dropped far too much. I tried loosening the bottom hinges and tightening the top ones, and you sort of move the hinge over if you can in the holes, if you see what I mean. But that only sort of took about 1/2 millimetre, or made 1/2 millimetre difference. So that's why I had to resort to that little bit of strip wood. But it looks okay. You can't sort of see it unless you really sort of get down on your hands and knees. And once I've painted that black, you won't see it at all, even then. I'm quite pleased with that. It really feels good to actually have the door on and not have to keep lifting it off and propping it up against the window there. And then I fitted the little eye and hook. And what they were actually using for an eye before was just a screw, oops, and then just hooking that over. So this is the original eye, because the new ones I got were a lot bigger than this. But I'm using the little, no, that's the hook, sorry. It's been a long day. Yeah, so that's the original hook there, and that's a new eye rather than using the screw. And that just goes in there like that and keeps the door closed. And there we have a completed project. So here we are. We've finally come to the end of our Little Harbour Homewares shop series. I've really enjoyed this series and I hope you have too, whether you've built your own shop and you've actually been following along, or whether you've just been enjoying watching me create mine. And it's now time for the official opening. I'm very excited to announce that Little Harbour Homewares is now officially open. Okay, now the shop is officially opened, it's time to go shopping. Okay, so that's it for today, and I really hope you've enjoyed this final episode. I just want to end by saying a huge thank you to each of you for being here with me on Patreon. Your support, your kind comments and messages, your tips and advice really are appreciated. Okay, so I'll see you again in the next video. Until then, take care. Bye.